Hello, everyone. Hi. Nice to see you all. Welcome. Good evening. My name is Sarah Rafson. I'm the Associate Director of Public Programs here at the GSD. And I want to welcome you to Bill McKibben's lecture, A Fresh Start for Our Cities. It's our open house lecture, which is a much anticipated tradition that sets the tone for some of the important conversations that we have here at the GSD across the many disciplines at our school. So look around, because in the audience, you may notice not only some current GSD students, but you might also see some admitted students who are interested in pursuing degrees in landscape, urban design, architecture, and many more in the programs we offer. But we're also really thrilled that tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability through its Climate Crossroads Debating Energy's Next Frontier series, which brings leading voices confronting the intertwined challenges of climate change and the global energy transition to Harvard University. And this is also made possible by the support of Melissa Caish and Jonathan Dorfman through their Makers Fund here at the GSD. So thank you. I have a quick reminder that we have live captioning available for tonight's event. For those of you who are joining virtually, please click the closed captioning icon in the live stream window. And for those of you here in the theater, please use the QR code on that screen. And Matt in the AV booth can help you if you need any assistance. I also just want to take a couple minutes to tell you about some of the upcoming events here at the GSD in our public program series. Next week, on March 31st, Chakpang Chuenrudamal, founder of Chat Architects, will share some of his research on Bangkok Bastards, works of everyday architecture created by everyday people to solve everyday problems. And then the following week, the MacArthur Genius Award-winning landscape architect Kate Orff, founder of the firm Scape, will give a lecture that draws through lines across 30 years of work since her time at the GSD. She'll be linking her research, publications, and landscape projects along a trajectory of thought and action. For more information and to see the full lineup of events, please visit the GSD's website. And now I'd like to hand it over to Gary Hilderbrand, Chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture here at the GSD, who will introduce tonight's event. Thanks, Gary.
Good evening. Thanks to you, Sarah, and to the entire public programs and communications team for always amazing support. Welcome, everyone. It's incredible to see this full Piper audience. It's great. As Sarah mentioned, it's my honor to be the chair of the Department of Landscape Architecture here at GSD, now in its 126th year. And it's an enormous pleasure to welcome Bill McKibben back to Gund Hall. Bill drove in from his home today in Vermont. I'm guessing there might be some proud friends from Lexington here in the audience. I want to thank Jim Stock, Jim Clem, and Dave Cash and their team at the Salata Institute for co-sponsoring this event and for helping bring out an audience from all corners of the university. We're grateful for Salata's leadership and partnership in many ways here at GSD. Let me also extend a warm welcome to an impressive group of prospective students, as Sarah mentioned, who have been admitted to our various degree programs and who are visiting Gund Hall today and tomorrow for our admissions open house gatherings for admitted students. Congratulations on your admission. Again, you keep hearing it. And best wishes as we all approach decision time. The clock is ticking. And now just a shameless pitch. Encounters with luminaries like Bill McKibben are really regular events here. Just look at the calendar, as Sarah pointed out, and see for yourself. Before I introduce our main act, this is a program note. After Bill's talk, I will ask Rebecca Henderson and Oliver Wainwright to join Bill on the stage for discussion. Rebecca Henderson is the John and Natty MacArthur University Professor, that's a long title, one of 25 university professors at Harvard. She's a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research and a fellow of both the British Academy and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She's a faculty associate of the Salata Institute, as am I. Rebecca's research explores the degree to which the private sector can play a major role in building a more sustainable economy. That's important. Her many publications really relate to Bill's work so beautifully, and I know they're old friends. Accelerating Energy Innovation, Insights from Multiple Sectors, Political Economy and Justice, and Reimagining Capital in a World on Fire. Oliver Wainwright is the architecture and design critic of The Guardian, one of my requisite dailies, and is currently a Loeb Fellow here at GSD, where his presence has been notably felt over this academic year. He trained as an architect and worked at the Mayor of London's Architecture and Urbanism Unit, well known, OMA in Rotterdam, and the remarkable Muff Architecture Art Complex in London, the practice, I should say. Many of us enjoy Ollie's insightful and sharply critical work for The Guardian, and his Instagram is full of spectacular photography and delightful turns of phrase. It's great having you around, Gundhall. Many of us find ourselves pretty constantly saying we live in strange times, dark and grim times all around, and higher education is just but one of many institutions under attack. At Harvard, we are grateful for amazing leadership and solidarity in this picture. But many days the news is just tough. But designers and planners here at GSD are by nature activist and optimistic. And I have found a great fund of optimism in Bill McKibben's new book, and you'll hear about it tonight. Here Comes the Sun, a last chance for the climate and a fresh chance for civilization will make you hopeful for a liberating new frontier in a world beyond the churning, crushing power of big oil. In 1989, with his first book, Bill McKibben became an instant legend by predicting a potentially unrepairable decline of our relationship to Earth and its natural processes due to the projected rise of global temperatures. It was pretty much the first worthy and readable book on climate, and it was roundly praised and also sharply criticized as apocalyptic. The doubts came because not many climate scientists at that time agreed that the predicted rise in global temperatures would be what they were going to be in Bill's book. Anybody question that? In her recent interview with the Times' David Marchese, Rebecca Solnit, another favorite climate warrior, said this, which I think resonates well with this yeoman work of climate activism. She says, and I quote, "The wonder and horror for climate is that the great majority of people on Earth support climate action. The obstacles are not technological." He says the same thing. And they're political. The fossil fuel industry and the rich and powerful and governmental figures who either are or serve the fossil fuel industry are what's holding us back. So the wonder and horror exist side by side. You can be thrilled by all the things that are happening and horrified by all the things that should be happening but are not. Everything we can save is worth saving. Everything we can do is worth doing. We've already lost a lot, but we don't have to lose everything. We don't have to surrender, end quote. This is the optimist, humanist outlook in Rebecca Solnit and Bill McKibben that gives us hope for a return to sanity, equity, and justice. Bill McKibben, the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College in Vermont, is a contributing writer for The New Yorker for so long, and a founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60, I know about that, to work on climate and racial justice. His theory is that this age group has already had an impact in changing the world through the environmental and civil rights movements, they know how to do it. And they can do it again, and they can lead the way. He founded the first global grassroots climate campaign, 350.org, it's a catchy one, which has organized some of the largest global climate events in history. In 2014, he was awarded the Right Livelihood Prize, sometimes thought of as the alternate Nobel in the Swedish Parliament. He's also won the Gandhi Peace Award and received honorary degrees from 19 colleges and universities. He knows how one lives for days inside a holding cell, because he's been jailed for protesting more than a few times. One of the things about his more than 20 books is that, as a writer and a devotee of long-form journalism myself, I get title envy just about every time. Here Comes the Sun. God, you know, that's... I lost my place. My favorite of these titles takes a minute. The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders, what the hell happened? Apparently he gets his way with editors who usually like punch but brevity. About that book, just a couple of years ago, the Times Review critic Timothy Egan said this, quote, "McKibben knows better than most that narrative shapes policy and that mass movements rarely succeed without a story to embrace. Anyone not in McKibben's camp seems unlikely to join if the takeaway message is your country, your religion, and your neighborhood all suck." But it's a far better message than that. You have to read the book. And maybe he didn't read it all, because it's a book that offers steps to take, and it offers a lot of hope for getting back the country that he once thought was great. What we love in the work is the voice. Reflective, reflexive, curious, conversational, a little bit in your ear, sometimes exhorting the reader like, let's do that. Halting sentences, exclamations, and honestly a kind of lively self-deprecating repartee with the reader. I trust this will be clear tonight if you haven't already read the work. Here's one more bit of voice that I really liked in Here Comes the Sun. And it will give you a feel for the electrical pulse and charge this book delivers. Quote, "Unlike oil and gas, sun and wind can't be hoarded. If fascism scares you like it does me, figuring out how to break the centralized power of the fossil fuel industry is a key form of resistance. So let's do this." Thanks to both Rebecca and Ollie for joining us tonight, and please a warm welcome for America's top environmental activist, Bill McKibben.
Gary, thank you for that very, very kind introduction, and what a pleasure to be here. I know that because we're in Gund Hall that most of you are visual thinkers, so I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm not going to, in fact, we can even turn off that slide. I'm not going to show you any pictures at all until maybe the very end if you're quite good. Then I might. I'm experimenting with a new technology that I call virtual PowerPoint. If it works correctly, the picture should appear in your mind while I speak, so we shall see. It's good to be back here in this hall. When I was an undergraduate, back in the dim mists of history, I would come over here to John Stilgoe had just replaced J.B. Jackson at the helm of the iconic, if somewhat gut-coarse gas stations, America's visual landscape, and so I would come over here once a week for that. When I was back at Harvard at the turn of the century as a fellow at the Div School for a year, I had lots and lots of students from over here come implore me to come talk, because they said that in those days there was very little interest at the GSD in sustainability and the environment. I remember one young woman saying to me, all they want to talk about is Frank Gehry. So I had a great time talking with students in that point, but I'm so glad to see now that this is a deep central part of the work of this place. And I had a great time with students this afternoon talking about the work that they were up to. I'm going to talk about context for a minute, about where we are. And I apologize in advance for the fact that this is a little bleak. The first important piece of context is just to remind ourselves what is happening with the climate on our planet. The warnings from 40 years ago in The End of Nature sadly have all come true. In fact, they've come true faster and harder than we would have thought then. The last 3 years have been the hottest 3 years we've ever recorded on this planet. The damage is extraordinary. We see it now minute by minute because since warm air holds more water vapor than cold, we get extended periods of evaporation and drought in arid areas that then turn to fire, and we get extended periods of downpour in wet areas that, say, like Oahu this past 4 or 5 days, where the damage so far is at $2 billion. But we're also now beginning to do systemic structural damage to the planet in ways that are truly remarkable. The jet stream draws its power from the temperature differential between the equator and the poles. As we've warmed the poles so quickly, the jet stream now gets stuck in strange, wonky, high amplitude positions that produce long bouts of drought or flood on either side. Very close to home here, the great currents of the Atlantic, the Gulf Stream, and the other parts of that world's biggest heat distribution engine are beginning to flicker and falter as fresh water pours off a melting Greenland, changing the salinity and hence the density of the seawater in the North Atlantic. It's that density that drives those currents, and they've begun to wobble. So I could go on for a very long time. I won't, but we're at a absolutely critical point, and it may be the last points over which we have any real leverage here. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change told us a few years ago that if we had any hope of coming close to anything like the targets we set in Paris, that we needed to cut emissions in half by 2030, which by my watch is now 3 years and 9 months away. It is a very tall task. We will be reminded of our problem more and more intensely in the next year, because it's now pretty clear that what looks like a savage El Nino will form sometime between July and September of this year. It's almost a lock that 2027 will be the hottest year we've ever measured on this planet, and with it, those temperatures will come yet more chaos. That'll be extremely damaging because the planet is also in the midst of an authoritarianism crisis, and no place more profoundly than our own country. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about this tonight, but suffice it to say that we are in a place as a nation that in my long years on this planet, I never would have thought that we would have gotten. Third Act, this group of old people like me that we have formed to take action on climate and democracy, we were just doing a series of videos over the last 2 weeks with some of our oldest members on the theory that if you're 85 or older now, you've been around for more than a third of the 250-year story of America. And so you have a good baseline against which to judge things. And by that baseline, this is not just a bad period, this is utterly different from anything that's ever happened in our lifetimes, and we need to be standing up to it. And that crisis grows out of, in part, and is roiling around this crisis in affordability, felt most profoundly by, I think, younger people in this country who find it very hard to imagine what the future looks like. So that is the dark context in which we exist. I think the thing I really want to try and say tonight is that there is one big good thing happening on this planet that might conceivably take a bite out of those big bad things. And that is the sudden, very rapid, very startling emergence of clean, renewable energy as a kind of vanguard technology. The stuff that we have spent our whole lives calling alternative energy, energy from the sun and the wind, is no longer alternative energy. It's now the obvious, common sense, straightforward way to power the planet. 95% of new electric generation around the planet came from clean energy sources last year. And the speed with which this is happening, all of which derive from the fact that about 5 years ago we crossed some invisible line where it became cheaper to produce energy from the sun and the wind than from burning things. A landmark moment in human history, since the archaeologists tell us people have been setting things on fire for 700,000 years or so. The speed with which that is happening offer us at least some possibilities, not of a way out, but of a way at least to have some opportunities, some possibilities. It is much too late, for instance, to stop global warming. That's not going to happen. But it's not too late to start shaving tenths of a degree off how hot the planet eventually gets. And every tenth of a degree that we raise the temperature of the Earth moves about 100 million of our brothers and sisters out of a safe climate zone and into a more perilous one. So it remains by far the biggest task that humans have ever had to try and do something about this. Let me say, too, since it's a conversation we were having this afternoon, and I think an important one, that this advent of these new technologies scrambles a little bit the way that we've been thinking about adaptation and mitigation of the climate crisis. And I know that a lot of the work here, and beautiful work about things like stormwater management and things, has been classed under the area of adaptation. Very important that we do that. But if we don't circumscribe the rise in temperature, then we will quickly reach a point where adaptation is essentially impossible. And at the same time, these tools are also tools of adaptation themselves, because they're very different in their kind than the energy sources, fossil fuel, that they replace. They allow us to imagine a kind of reimagining of the world under different terms with different, much more benign concentrations of power. So let me just say quickly that this stuff is growing very, very, very fast. The story really is a story of about the last 36 months, and it's concentrated, of course, most powerfully in China, where about 50%, a little bit more, of clean energy has been installed. The pace at which they're doing it is instructive about what the possibilities are. This time last year, China was building 3 gigawatts of solar power a day. A gigawatt's the rough equivalent of a big coal-fired power plant. So they were putting up one of those made out of solar panels every 8 hours across China, okay? Which gives you some sense that if we set our mind to it, the speed with which we could do this is very real and very powerful. obviously, it's helpful in the climate fight to do this. China, though it remains a fast-growing economy, is not increasing its use of fossil fuel now. Indeed, it seems to have plateaued and maybe even begun to take a small step backward. That is way in advance of when we hoped that it might happen, and it's one of the most significant events in the world in a long time. But it's not only helpful in the climate fight. It's also helpful, I think, in this battle against authoritarianism, very linked to the outcome of all our other fights. And that's because these technologies, sun, wind, and batteries, are fundamentally different than the ones that they replace. Fossil fuel is only available in a few places. That means that the people who control those few places end up with huge amounts of wealth and power, which they then routinely abuse. And if you had any doubts of that before this year, I hope you were paying attention when, say, Donald Trump took over Venezuela without even mentioning human rights or democracy. Instead, he said, you have oil and we want the oil, so we're coming to get it. I think you may have noticed that we're now engaged in a war in the Persian Gulf, whose entire weapon is control of the supply of oil through those places. People are dying, people will starve, because of the fight over fossil fuel, a fight that really now could be made unnecessary in short order. Sunlight travels 93 million miles to reach the Earth, but none of those miles are through the Strait of Hormuz, okay? So the liberatory power of an energy resource that's available to everyone, everywhere, is quite remarkable. Think how the geopolitics of the planet over the last 100 years would have been different if oil had been of relatively trivial value in that period. The wars, coups, terrorist plots, things that would have been avoided. Look, for instance, at what's happening right now in Cuba as America tries to squeeze the life out of it by cutting off its imports of oil. The only thing that Cuba has going for it is the fact that they built more solar power over the last 18 months than, percentage terms, than any country on Earth. It's not going to be enough, I'm afraid, to save them, but it's the one thing that's helping them. So, as you can tell, I am a very big advocate of the rapid adoption of solar and wind and batteries. They are not without problems, but the problems that they produce around mining and things are far, far, far smaller than the problems that come with fossil fuel. I was saying to students before, there is no such thing as a free lunch, as Rebecca can assure us, but there are less expensive and more expensive lunches, and this is in the former category. Much of the work that goes on because of the necessary scale is in rural places, and those are important to talk about and think about. I'm not going to do it at any great depth here because of our topic, but let me just say that we're going to need to use 1 or 2% of the surface of the Earth to produce our energy, which is a perfectly rational use of that landscape. Clean electrons are a crucial and important crop. We already use far more of that, our landscape in this country, to produce energy. We just do it super inefficiently by growing ethanol. We use 30 million acres for that. It produces 3% of America's energy. If we covered that same those same cornfields with solar panels, it would produce about 100% of the energy we currently use. But we don't need to cover Indiana stem to stern with solar panels because we've got other places too and things to use. But let me just say, since we're in a place that takes landscape seriously, it is really interesting to think about the fact that as we build out solar farms, a solar farm only covers half the land that it occupies with panels. And in between, half that land is now vacant. It becomes a new canvas on which to exercise human ingenuity. I think it may be the largest new landscape that humans have created in a very long time. Currently, we use the clunky term agrivoltaics to describe this field, but it is a beautiful set of possibilities that people are now experimenting with, and one that I hope students and faculty here will do much to try and lead us on. But at its most atomic level, these new forms of energy also have the power to transform cities in very interesting ways. The French have now passed a law that any parking lot with more than, I think, 50 spaces needs to be covered with a solar canopy. Those of you who study landscape in American cities know that American cities are largely derived of parking lots, and the possibility that those become, among other things, utilities is a very powerful and interesting one. At an even more granular level, in the last 3 years, 4 or 5 million Europeans have put on their apartments, since they often lack a roof of their own, what we are calling balcony solar or plug-in solar. This is the single smallest form of this technology. You go to Best Buy and give them a few hundred euros, and you come home with a solar panel designed to be zip tied to the railing of your apartment balcony. On the back is a plug that you plug into the wall. No electrician required. It produces 20%, 25% of the electricity that an apartment uses. That's a remarkable thing, a remarkable possibility that is currently illegal everywhere in the US except the state of Utah, which last year passed by unanimous vote of the state legislature the enabling legislation. Virginia did it last week, and I think the governor will sign it this week. We now have bills in 28 state legislatures as of this spring. It would be very good to call your state senator and ask them to make sure that the one in Beacon Hill passes this year so that this becomes legal everywhere. But it's a remarkable reminder of how technology can very quickly start transforming things, including affordability. The payback time on these things is a few years, and it makes life much, much easier. There's other technology, too, that's coming of age very, very rapidly that offers all kinds of fascinating possibilities. So, for instance, in the home, the two of the biggest sources of energy use are how you heat and cool the home and how you cook food. The heat pump is one of those miracle technologies that manages to take the heat latent in the air around us and with a little bit of electricity transform it into both heating and cooling. It is extraordinarily elegant technology and extraordinarily easy to retrofit on existing buildings. It's been really wonderful to watch, for instance, Boston's Housing Authority and now the New York City Housing Authority beginning to outfit public housing units with these heat pumps because they provide much better comfort levels at much, much lower levels of energy use. In the kitchen, where for a long time we have embraced the idea that it'd be a good idea to have an open campfire over which to cook our food, we now have this induction cooktop, $60 from Amazon, for a kind of standalone burner version of it that I cooked on for many, many years. I'm the cook in our house. I can't tell you exactly how it works, magnets, okay? But it boils water faster than what was the gas stove that it replaced, and children raised in homes with gas stoves have a 50% higher rate of asthma than children raised in ones that don't, because, well, I mean, if you think about it, it is a weird idea that at this point in human history, we have a big blazing fire in the middle of our homes if we don't need to. These are elegant technologies, in other words, that come with no diminution of human comfort, no particular sacrifice involved, but they change dramatically the way that we use energy. In the shortest telling, they're the substitution of work energy for heat energy. And that's why they're so much more efficient than the thing that they replace. The greatest example of this, of course, and the one that is going to have the biggest effect on cities going forward, are the ways that we're now able to electrify mobility. We talk mostly about the EV, and it's important that we do, but the e-bus, which now exists in most places, not this country so much, but many, many other places in huge numbers, China especially, is transformative. And even more than that, I think the single most transformative technology that's coming out of this whole period may turn out to be the e-bike. Affordable to everyone around the world, now selling hundreds of millions of units a year because it's such graceful technology. I mean, the bicycle by itself is pretty elegant to begin with, but now we have a bicycle that has no hills. And that is a huge, huge change, because hills, if you think about it, are a chief obstacle for human beings as they try to move their bodies and their stuff around the world. And if you can produce something, which we now can, that overcomes that at the cost of about a penny's worth of electricity for every 5 miles that it moves, you've changed things in very dramatic ways. So let's talk a little bit about how some of this is beginning to manifest. First thing to say is, technology is great, but it is most helpful when it's embedded in wise public policy. And we have plenty of examples of what that might look like. The most remarkable in America in the last few years was the introduction of congestion pricing in New York City a year or so ago. After endless debate and delay, it was finally approved, and in the course of a year has turned absolutely everybody into an advocate of it. It did everything it was supposed to do and far, far more. The number of trips in Lower Manhattan is down, but so are the number of car trips across the entire metropolitan region. Pollution is down dramatically. It's much quieter. The number of people getting killed by cars is dropped dramatically. Commercial traffic into stores and restaurants is increased in these places where it's in effect. And the good news is it couldn't be easier to do. You could replicate it in hundreds of other places across America almost literally overnight. It's the kind of public policy that can spread with enormous speed because, among other things, it more than pays for itself. It's also provided a huge windfall to the MTA so that public transit, which is a key part of this whole scheme, has the resources it needs to expand and grow. We can see around the rest of the world how cities have begun very rapidly to change. And remember, I keep stressing rapidly because the only solutions that matter to the climate crisis are ones that come quickly. If you have one that comes slowly, it's not a solution, okay? Because this is happening in real time, very, very urgently. But we can see how quickly change can come. 6 or 7 years ago, all the cities on the list of dirtiest cities on the planet, most polluted air, were in China. When you got that list every week, there was just one Chinese city after another. Now, none of those cities are on that list anymore. The speed with which they were able to improve air quality is really, really stunning. Partly it's because they've done a lot of conversion from coal-fired power plants to renewable energy power plants, and they've moved what coal-fired power they have to different places. But it's also because the cities, especially the big cities, Beijing, Shanghai, now run mostly on EVs for their auto fleet. I haven't been back to China since the COVID thing, but I've talked with friends in recent months who say not only is those of you who've spent time in China, say, a decade ago, will remember that it was a bizarre place because there was all these wild architectural, I guess, masterpieces, buildings that looked like people's legs walking across the city and stuff, but you couldn't see them from more than 200 yards away. They were just lost in a cloud of gray smoke. Well, that's not true anymore. And this really is remarkable. The cities are noticeably, measurably, considerably quieter than they were even a couple of years ago because so much of the traffic is electric now. The idea that you can change huge urban areas quite quickly should give us great hope. A perfect example is, of course, what's happened in Paris over the last 6 or 7 years as Anne Hidalgo, as mayor, took that city in a radically new direction. The FT had a great story a few days ago about how Paris became a bike city, and the statistics in it are just remarkable about the decrease in automobile traffic, the increase in cycle traffic, but more importantly, the increase in happiness of the people who get to live there. A happiness reflected in the fact that Hidalgo's Socialist Party won quite convincingly the election last weekend to succeed her in office, and the new mayor, Emmanuel Gregoire, rode to his victory party on one of the bike share bikes there in Paris. Remarkable transformation. All of this now, hopefully, is trickling down quickly to other places. And maybe the most important example and the most important test case will be what happens in India. India has, at the moment, some of the dirtiest air in the world. New Delhi, there are 5 million school children, 2.5 million of whom have irreversible lung damage just from breathing the air. But that's changing quickly now, it looks like. India is installing renewable energy very fast, and the transportation revolution there is mostly, and this may be, along with e-bikes, the more important than EVs, is the introduction of vast numbers of electrified three-wheeler, scooters, taxis, jitneys, whatever you call them. The speed with which that happening is very, very hopeful. India may be the first big country that manages to go through its development phase without complete reliance on fossil fuel. It's lucky that it's coming at just this moment, and it may be able to really build on sun and wind. I got to say, none of this completely surprises me, because I think that this has long been out there for the kind of taking, that the transformation of urban areas is many years ago, in the 1990s, I spent a year writing a long chapter of a book of mine on a city in Brazil called Curitiba that some of you may know, that was sort of the pioneering place for, and in many remarkable ways. They're most famous for its mayor, Jaime Lerner, an architect, wanted to answer the question of why bus service was so slow, why it took so long, and he sat on a lawn chair outside City Hall for a couple of days, and when it was done, he sketched his solution. What he'd figured out was one reason buses were slow was that you had to walk up the steps, drop in your coin, walk to the back of the bus. He designed buses that looked like subways where the doors open like this, and you could build a platform, pay your money, wait for the bus to come, and you basically had a street subway. This is the birth of bus rapid transit that now has been transforming cities across South America and Asia. But Curitiba did dozens of other brilliant things. They became the largest green space city in the per capita in the world because instead of channelizing their streams, they used that money to go build parks upstream that would flood during the rainy season. But the property values around these parks, of course, increased, providing the tax money necessary to keep this experiment going. The thing that moved me the most once, and perhaps this will move those of you who are architecture students, was being there on a week when they were since they had so many people who'd streamed in from the countryside, and since they didn't want to develop favelas, slums, they were taking areas of the city and turning them into, in essence, public housing, but they didn't have the money to build housing projects. Instead, what they were doing was letting anyone come in and sit down with an architecture student from the architecture college for an hour and tell them what was important to them. I remember sitting with an old woman who said, I like to watch my neighbors and know what they're doing, and watch the guy design a house with a big window in the kitchen looking out. Then they would give people a pile of bricks and boards and tell them which order to build the rooms of their new home. It was transformative and incredibly moving to see that they decided that poverty and bad housing was just not something they were going to live with. At any rate, the kind of developments that came out of that, when you would sit with the mayor, he would explain, my goal is to make this city not more sustainable, my goal is to make it more gregarious, more possible for people to be out in public spaces with each other, on the subway, public transit, in the parks, public spaces, on and on and on. Gregarious was the word that he used, gregarious and connected. Which leads me, as we begin to close here, to say that the most important urban innovation of this year didn't come from Paris or Beijing or Shanghai, and it didn't have anything to do with the high technology or the low technology of the solar panel or the battery. The most important urban development of this year came out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the technology in use was the whistle. It was a powerful, powerful reminder of what neighborliness looks like. And neighborliness at the end is one of maybe the most important of the goals that if we're talking about resilience and adaptation and survival on a difficult world, then anything, including solar panels, that helps build that neighborliness is very, very much to the good. They've been able to summon neighbors together in defense of the most vulnerable, and that's what defines greatness in a city. I think it's as powerful a chapter in the history of nonviolence as the Montgomery bus boycott 70 years ago this winter, or the Salt March across India 95 years ago this year. A truly epic moment in our history. And boy, would it be nice if the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded this year to these citizens of Minneapolis. They greatly deserve it. They greatly deserve it, and boy, would it frost Donald Trump. So I promised you that I'd show you a picture at the end if you were good, and you've been very good. So I'll just say this kind of organizing is exactly what we need. Last fall, we did this thing called Sunday. We had 500 events across the country to celebrate the rise of renewable energy and the possibilities that it presented. We're not doing it this year because this year winning the midterms is the only goal that matters. But We are doing it next year. Circle the summer solstice in the Northern Hemisphere on your calendar, because it's going to be a huge global Day of Action celebration push. In the meantime, let me finish by saying that I hope you all know where you're going to be on Saturday for No King's Day. The interplay of technology and of politics and of resistance is absolutely crucial. None of this works by itself. Together, maybe we've got a fighting chance. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Bill. I'd like to have you come to the stage. You too, please. Amazing. Thank you, Bill. It's stirring the way that you deliver so much information, so many hard facts, so many percentages.
Was the virtual PowerPoint working? Yeah, okay, good.
We could see it all. I just have two comments, and then I'm going to ask my mates here to give their observations and ask some questions. First one is that your description of the technologies makes us all think they're pretty simple. And I think you're mostly right. You know, in the Here Comes the Sun, you say it's like, okay, you got to point a mirror to the sun and you get power out of it. That's simple. And it's constant. And as we say, nobody can hoard it. But I don't want to be Pollyannish, because the other side, well, the thing you just showed, resistance isn't easy at all. It's hard work. And you have how many people in 360.org?
In third act, we have about 120,000 of us old folks now. So yeah, if you tell your grandparents, and you know, it's...
Or your professors. So it sounds easy, and it's not quite so easy. Second thing is that I appreciate the charge. Maybe we haven't taken up the question of what is the big landscape opportunity, the canvas that you paint. What are the landscapes of solar power? There's been some work. You know, in the last 20 years, I would say there's been some work. But as you say, the dramatic rise, which makes it more affordable, means that we have work to do in order to describe the circumstances where it makes sense and what the character of a place might be. So that funny term, agrovoltaic, is kind of banging around in my head. And my wheels are turning a little bit as to what we might do, and then we're going to be calling on you to come and take a look at it.
Good. I can't wait. I really do think that this is a kind of charrette moment for the planet, you know, because there's a whole new set of possibilities. We're unconstrained in new ways, but it takes a little work to get out of the ways that we're used to thinking about how things work. And we don't have to be, I mean, just the e-bike alone it changes the landscape in profound new ways, that it's very worth thinking about what that might mean for built environments, for transportation corridors, for on and on and on.
That he used the word charrette means he's very welcomed here. So Ollie, a little bit of reaction and maybe a question or two.
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to congratulate you, Bill, for writing a book about climate which doesn't make you want to go and top yourself. It's incredibly positive and relentlessly optimistic, and I think I agree with pretty much every argument you put forward. However, I'm a critic, and so it would be remiss of me not to try and pick some holes in your beautiful,
Please.
eloquent argument. I'd like to start with, I think, the unintended consequences of the solar revolution, which really hit home to me a few years ago. I lived in Los Angeles briefly and took a long trip out to a very strange place called Desert Center, which is halfway between LA and Phoenix. And it's home to the East Riverside Solar Energy Area, which is an area about 10 times the size of Manhattan, which is currently being carpeted with solar panels. Great, good news story, at least it was at the time before Trump stopped it. But the reality on the ground was actually very shocking. I spoke to a number of residents that actually lived in this area that I think the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, had assumed was empty desert. It turned out the empty desert is very much a human construct. It's not empty. It's a place of incredible biodiversity. It's a place where probably the most efficient form of natural carbon sequestration has been going on for the last several hundred, if not thousands of years, with plants which on the surface look like desert scrub that you can bulldoze and place your solar field on top. Underneath is this incredibly sophisticated system where mesquite, where yucca, where creosote bush have been capturing carbon in the form of caliche, this kind of calcium carbonate, storing it underground for centuries, for thousands of years in some cases. And one of the issues is when these big solar farms come and kind of carve up the ground to build this brave new future, that carbon is released back into the atmosphere. So we're solving one problem, but we're kind of undoing a problem that nature has been solving for us for generations. So that's one aspect. Not only is it the kind of environmental issue, but it's also home to the endangered desert tortoise, various indigenous sacred sites, and obviously groundwater, which is being rapidly depleted by the growth of these solar farms. The second issue I wanted to challenge you on, which you mentioned briefly, but I don't think you interrogate with your true kind of journalist's power, is the problem of supply chains. So China is hailed in the book as the great savior and the great kind of winner at the moment, and it's certainly overtaken America when it comes to solar. However, most of the solar panels produced in China are produced in Xinjiang, where it's been recorded that the forced labor of Uyghur Muslims is involved in the production of these panels in polysilicon factories that are powered by coal. So there's a kind of untold story to the clean energy revolution that I think we really need to dig into with a bit more precision when we think about where these things are coming from. Not only that, but the human rights abuses of cobalt mining in the Congo, of lithium mining in Bolivia, those things go on and on. And what happens after 25 to 30 years when the end of these solar panels' life comes? Are we going to be faced with millions of tons of kind of solar waste, which at the moment there's no really affordable and efficient way of recycling those panels?
So let's talk about all those. Let's take them in reverse order. In fact, we now know how to recycle all this stuff and are doing it on a fairly large scale, although the scale's not as large as we would have expected because all these things, both solar panels and batteries, are turning out to last much longer than we thought they would. But the stuff in them is valuable. Lithium is valuable. So we know how to get it out, and people have built the facilities increasingly to do it. The biggest nickel mine in America is now the battery recycling plant on the California-Nevada border, okay? On the question of China and labor, I think that your data's out of date. Most solar panels aren't built in Xinjiang. They're built across China, where there are factories in pretty much all the parts of China. In fact, there's such an oversupply, in a sense, of these factories that the government has been trying to shut some of them down to raise the price. A huge mistake, I think. I think we should be globalizing them and running them 24/7. But if you want to talk about the pollution that comes from them, and you have to do the work of holding it up against what it replaces, what you use otherwise. And when you do that, there's no comparison at all. the amount of mining, the Rocky Mountain Institute, Amory Lovin's shop, did a study last year saying the amount of mining that you need to do to get the renewable battery transition by mid-century is smaller than the volume of coal we mined last year on this planet, okay? And if you're going to talk about recycling, I mean, what do you do with coal? You set it on fire, and then you have to go mine some more the next day. There's no recycling it. It just disappears into carbon dioxide, which is then the thing heating the planet. As long as you're worrying about human impacts around the world, you better address the fact that 9 million humans die each year, 1 death in 5 on this planet from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. So yes, we should try to mine cobalt as safely as we can, but it's never going to come within 3 orders of magnitude of being a human rights crisis on the same level as fossil fuel. When it comes to endangered species and things in places where you're building solar panels, yeah, as I said, there are no free lunches, there are less and more expensive lunches. So you're going to have to use some land. We think 1 or 2% of the surface of the earth to produce the energy that we need. And that's going to come with some consequences, there's no question. But if what you're worried about is the destruction of species on this planet, it's very clear that the rapid heating of the earth is now triggering the 6th great extinction crisis in global history. We're producing carbon at a far faster rate now than we did at the end Permian, which knocked out something like 95% of the species on the Earth. So if we can't figure out how to interrupt that, it's not going to be just the desert tortoise that we take out. It's going to be pretty much everything. So I do get impatient sometimes with the sort of, yes, you can figure out a reason not to do things, and we should definitely try to do them as benignly as we can, but that should not be a reason to slow down the pace at which we're doing them, because pace is what actually counts here. If we can't do this quickly, then we will be overwhelmed by the accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere. It's completely possible, to be frank, that we've already passed that point. It's not clear. There are scientists who think we have waited too long. It's very clear that if we have a window left in which to act, it is a narrow window that is closing fast. This is an emergency unlike any that humans have ever wandered into before. And so we need new responses in all kinds of ways, including, among other things, the aesthetic response that looks at a field of solar panels or looks at a wind turbine on the horizon and recognizes it as something of beauty, that understands it as a kind of signal of human responsibility. And that, I think,
just to push you on that, Bill, wouldn't it be better to put it on land that's already been damaged, so
sure,
post-industrial
land? You can
land,
do some of that.
for agricultural land, rooftops, parking lots,
there's definitely some of that,
desert.
But we need to build it fast. And in fact, the desert is an excellent place because of the solar resource to be doing it. It's the highest rates of solar insolation on this continent. So it makes sense that we're doing it.
The dust and the sand make the panels slightly less efficient than if they were in an urban context.
And to just provide good news, there's been a lot of good data, even in the last 6 months, out of both Arizona and China to indicate that this is the first thing that's been able, that because one of the byproducts of a solar panel is shade, which is a useful quantity, a useful commodity on an overheating planet, that in fact the crust layer of the desert is growing back far faster in places with solar fields than without. The Chinese have, as you know, faced an extraordinary problem of desertification that's produced these massive sandstorms that coat the northern part of China with sand. The first thing to have finally slowed that desertification dramatically has apparently been the installation of these solar farms, because it's allowing that crust on the soil to form and hold that sand in place. So the new data that's emerging is really pretty powerful about all this and hopeful. Again, in the best of all possible worlds, we would, I don't know what sunshine would just hit our foreheads, and that would provide all our, we'd have no, but we don't live in anything close to the best of all possible worlds. We live in a deeply compromised world, and I think that this represents the first hint of a path that might lead us out of the terrible cul-de-sac in which we're now struggling.
And Ollie, don't you think we have the technologies to examine the surface of the desert and to make decisions about where and where not, right?
I think we do, but we're not using them. I mean, the BLM is an incredibly blunt
and that's
organization, to put it bluntly. They have no idea where they're building these things.
That the BLM has now banned all solar. The federal government says you can't put a solar panel any place on federal land in this country, and it was the same at the same time as they tried to shut down the offshore wind farms off the coast of New England. I think this is incredibly stupid public policy.
It might force the parking lot owners to actually build the shading canopies that France is getting on with. I mean, the desert is protected.
But there are not enough parking lots to provide the solar power that we need. We use crazy amounts of energy. We can cut back to some large degree the amount of energy that we use by embracing EVs, heat pumps, and things that use far less primary energy than the things that they replace. Another good way to do it would be to deeply ask ourselves exactly how many data centers we actually require on this planet. But in the best of all worlds, we're going to be using more electricity, not less, because we're converting our automobile fleet to electric vehicles. And that, So I guess I'll just end by saying, if I sound the slightest bit impatient, it's because I've spent much of, I've been an environmentalist, and much of my work over the years has been about deep questioning around questions around economic growth and things. I think that 100 years from now, humans will have much more interesting ways of satisfying themselves. I think that the sort of high consumer capitalist societies in which we live will look different, because I think humans want contact with each other and with the natural world more than they want stuff. I think that'll happen, but I don't think it'll happen in the next 5 years. We bring 100 million more people into the consuming class on this planet each year, almost all of them in Asia. I'm pretty sure that they're going to tread at least partway down the path that we have trod out before them. And so I think we better figure out how to make sure that that doesn't overwhelm every system on this planet as we do it.
Rebecca, there's your cue.
Bill, thank you for an extraordinary talk. Am I on? A couple of things I want to point to. One is, it's easy to say there are technological ways out of this. But the way in your book, you're so careful to specify exactly what they are, with facts and figures and stories. And as I think of so many people I know who think that, yes, climate change is an issue and it's really bad, but there's nothing I can do and there's nothing really we can do, your focus on, no, we can do this right now and it is already happening and here's the data, is, I think, incredibly powerful. So I love the book, and when I teach next week, I'm going to open the first 10 minutes with, I saw Bill McKibben on stage, and here's what he said, and you need to know it. Here it is. Boom, 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 boom. No, I'm serious. Because people can get stuck in despair and stuck in a kind of, can't do anything, it's not worth thinking about, I just drive a little less, or something, right? So I think the book is extraordinarily important. And I love the way, as Gary said, it's so easy to read, and so full of cool stuff, and not too long. So I want to raise a query and then ask a question. And my query is about a slide you didn't show. The slide you didn't show is the growth in fossil fuel consumption on the planet, which is just going up and up and up. And then you put on top of that the growth in renewables. And yes, 95% of new capacity is renewables, but it's still a teeny-weeny line. A 3 or 4 or 5% or maybe 6% line.
It's up above, well above that now.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, we can argue, but it's still quite small on top of the fossil fuels.
You're absolutely right. The hope is that we can keep the growth that we've seen for the last 36 months going for another 4 or 5 years. And if we can, then those numbers will have shifted dramatically.
So what I would have loved to have seen in the book, and it's the slide I will go home and construct myself, is if this growth continues at this rate, look what it could do.
Yep.
Because that's the danger, is someone looks at the current thing and they say, you've got to be kidding me. You know, it's still
That's
jump
why
change.
the story of what's happening in China is so fascinating.
I completely agree.
And the fact that their fossil fuel use seems to be
starting to
fall is crucial.
Even just flattening is absolutely extraordinary.
And the fact that India seems to be following them seems to me absolutely... Now, so what I didn't say in the course of this talk, but which you all know, is that the people, for most of us, the news that I've been giving is good. If you own an oil well or a coal mine, then this news is terrible. And they have mobilized in a huge way to try and, I mean, that's a large part of what the Trump administration is. I think that, as with all things, Trump administration is such a collection of morons that they're going to do themselves
I'm touching this table
damage.
in the hope it's wood.
I mean, it's a horrible thing to say, but this completely idiotic war that we're now engaged in the Persian Gulf, I think is going to have the completely unintended side effect of dramatically speeding up some of this transition, because we're already, I mean, as the price, there's been a bunch of stories in the last 10 days about how EV showrooms are suddenly filled with customers and so on. But any leader around the world is got to be looking, you can see it happening, is looking at the current situation and saying, do I want to be dependent for my energy supply on a country as erratic and unstable as the United States, you know? And I think so you can watch almost in real time as Vietnam and Malaysia and Indonesia make huge commitments. And these are the countries, India and those countries, that will tell the story. That's where growth is going to come, you know? It's worth remembering that the U.S. is only 11% of emissions at this point. So the fact that we're out of the game for the moment isn't completely determinative, especially if our idiocy is pushing other people in the right instead of the wrong direction.
So can I follow up? So I want to play to my capitalist side. And part of my capitalist side is really excited by the book, because you're describing a situation in which almost all new energy demand will be provided by renewables if we can get the capital in place. Because the thing about solar panels is you kind of pay it all
the
up
cost is up front. Yep.
And if I'm Indonesia or Vietnam, my cost of capital is way high than it is in the United States or in Europe, because there's a risk premium and for all kinds of reasons. So it feels to me that as a capitalist, what you're actually calling for is a massive transfer of capital to the growing economies to finance this. And so I'm very curious. You have been doing environmental action for many years. You've been right out front. You know what it feels like. Why do we still not have a sense of emergency? Why is it that the elites who control the money are still not pumping the money in this direction? What is happening?
So I mean, it's exactly the right question, and I'm afraid that the answer is that one of the things about the economics of renewable energy is that it's good news for everybody who consumes it, but bad news for the producers of energy. So the CEO of Exxon said last year, we will never invest in electrons instead of molecules because, quote, it doesn't offer above average returns for our investors. The two problems are the one that you identified, all the cost is up front, and that the return can never be as high for the people producing it as it was from oil, because once you've built the solar panel, then the sun delivers the energy for free every day.
Right.
Okay? And from Exxon's point of view, that's the stupidest business model of all time.
Right.
So yes, you're absolutely right that on a rational planet, what we would be doing right now is using every tool that we had, especially the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, to de-risk this investment.
Exactly.
They don't have enough money to pay for the build-out, but they do have enough money to make it possible that, you know, the pension fund in Seattle could invest in a solar farm in Senegal and have it be a productive relationship for both of them.
But this is the reason I think the United States and Europe, to a degree, remain still very important players.
Yes, and no question.
And so my question, which is an impossible question, but I'm going to ask anyone, I'm going to ask you, which is, what does it take to get a majority of ordinary voting citizens of this country, understanding that the future for their children and their grandchildren relies on their pension fund deciding to take a little bit more risk?
It's a very good question, and it's not.
How do we make that connection?
It's not impossible. So we built over many years a big climate movement, and by the 2020 election, the polling was showing that the most important issue for Democratic voters in the primaries was climate, #1 issue, which is why when Joe Biden won, he felt the need
to do the IRA.
That was Bernie's price for being, and Biden carried through on it. And one of the reasons that the climate movement is at an ebb tide at the moment is because the IRA was what everyone had been building up to.
Right.
Now it's disappeared under the power of the fossil fuel industry and the Trump administration. The movement will quickly build back because the natural world, will leave us no choice. As I say, even in the last 6 weeks, we've seen a lot of this rhetoric about climate's not an issue and stuff begin to shift. And the reason it's beginning to shift is we had a pretty cold winter here in the Northeast. In the United States as a whole, this was the second warmest winter in history. The western 2/3 of the United States absolutely broiled. This is continuing into the spring. The heat dome that was over the Southwest the last 2 weeks was probably the most anomalous weather event in American history. We broke the record for the hottest March temperature in, I think, 14 states. We broke the record for the hottest March temperature in America by 4 degrees, which statistically shouldn't be something that's even possible to approach. So it is, and as El Nino hits and things, this is not one of the things I worry about. I think it becomes an ever bigger issue. And now, for the first time as it does, we have this tool. The problem, for 35 years, the climate fight existed in a world where fossil fuel was relatively cheap and renewable energy relatively expensive. So all the work of the climate movement had to be about trying to make fossil fuel more expensive. That's what carbon pricing was. That's what why we were doing divestment, to raise the cost of capital. It's why we were blocking pipelines to try and slow the consolidation of this energy. Now they're the ones with the big political problem. The economic force of gravity is working the other way. That's why they're having to work so hard to game our political system. It's going to be a big fight. We're going to win the fight. because, well, for lots of reasons. The question is, will we win the fight fast enough? Because, in a world absent the pressing issue of climate change, it wouldn't make much difference. We would sit back, and 40 years from now, we will run the planet on sun and wind and batteries because they're cheap. But if it takes us anything like 40 years to get there, then the planet we run on sun and wind is a broken planet. So that's the thing, I think.
Can I just bring it to the built environment, given that we're at the GSD and the nature of the audience? Is there a danger that simply by swapping fossil fuels for solar, we're actually just going to carry on business as usual?
Yes.
Replacing petrol cars with EVs isn't the solution, I don't think.
Yes, absolutely.
The reason I brought up China, first of all, is that I went to Xiong'an recently, which is Xi Jinping's new prototype for how he wants all Chinese cities to be. It repeats all of the same mistakes that we have over the last century. It's still riven by 6-lane highways. It's still concrete high-rise apartments. It still inculcates loneliness. It's the opposite of the gregarious city that you were talking about earlier. And is there
There's a deep
danger that this kind of solar, the good news solar story is actually going to allow architects and urban planners and politicians to carry on as before?
There's a deep danger of that. But let's start by saying that even if that were true, that danger is a different scale of danger than raising the temperature of the planet another degree Celsius. But that's why I was talking so much about how we try to deploy this in ways that are liberatory in so many ways. And that's why the challenge for people here is to think about all the possibilities that it raises. And some of those are policy things like congestion pricing. Some of those are the things, taking the example of what Anne Hidalgo was doing in Paris and, doing really interesting city transformation. And some of it is the stuff that really no one has even really begun to figure out yet. Like, I'll just repeat myself, the e-bike is a completely revolutionary technology that could change, it already is changing in the most remote parts of the developing world, the ways that humans are able to move around. So if we start thinking about ways to build environments where that is really sensible, then hopefully we can prevent people from having to move from e-bikes to EVs at some point, That's the kind of hope. A, because it's, in material terms and things much better, but B, as you point out, because it also could be much more delightful, which is, a powerful end goal to have in mind. It may not be as powerful as the goal of keeping the temperature from going to 3 or 3.5 degrees Celsius, but it's a very powerful one, and I think they're very interlinked. If it isn't delightful to be doing some of this stuff, then we probably won't do it,
The clock is ticking, but I did want to see if we could have a question or two from the audience, and we have a couple of roaming mics. Please wait for the mic. Here's the question.
Hello, I'm Klaus Hecking. I'm a journalist from Germany, from Der Spiegel. I'm one of their correspondents here for the US. And I have one question because, it was very recently, the government announced that they will give $1 billion or something close to that to Total Energies, to cancel their wind farms and instead invest that into fossil fuel. I would just like to, what might be behind that decision, because they take taxpayers' money, let's say,
yes.
to kind of
This is a very good question. This may be we're reaching now the point of just like complete ludicrousness in our policy making. And so there are 160 million taxpayers in this country, and each of them now will get to chip in $6 to make sure that we don't build, to pay a French company not to ever catch the wind off the, in two big places off the Atlantic seaboard. It is impossible to make a public policy argument for doing this. It's ludicrous, but it is absolutely symbolic. We've discussed many of the deep strategic reasons around economics why America is behaving in bad ways. It also needs to be said that when you elect a child president of the United States, you end up with incredibly childish things. This guy hates wind because of the view from like the 9th fairway on his stupid Scottish golf course. And as a result, we're taking one of the most elegant and beautiful sources of wind. The good news is that the wind farms in the last week, Revolution Wind and Vineyard Wind, have come more or less online, and they've performed this winter during the cold stretch impeccably, more reliably than natural gas power plants were performing during that stretch. So the proof of concept is there. Trump, that's why No King's Day is incredibly important. We want to shorten the time in which this guy has power to wreck things. And if he comes back next year to a Congress that has Democratic majorities in the House and Senate, then we have some leverage to use against him. He won't be able to do as many stupid things. Maybe then we'll be able to just give him every day another golden statue of some kind and entertain him to the point that we can get back to behaving like serious country again. That's the goal. Please show up on Saturday, and please figure out how to help in November.
One more question.
I loved what you said about e-bikes and building a world that accommodates them and so on. But talk to me about the e-bike station wagon when you've got 2 kids and a dog and you're and luggage and you want to get it all somewhere. Talk about that a little bit.
Sure. The most beautiful, Oliver, you must have spent time over the years in like Stockholm and places and watched the rapid development of the cargo bike as another new human form. You can't, it's not the same, but it's, there are plenty of ways to move groceries around and kids around and so on and so forth. And when people start doing it, the evidence is pretty strong that people enjoy it immensely. And there's been a huge boom in cargo bikes even in the last year in this country. I don't mean to be over hopeful about things, okay? I wrote the first book about all this and it had the cheerful title, The End of Nature, okay? So my basic stance in the world is much like Oliver's much of the time, okay? And I'm extremely grateful to him for those strong and important questions that we should be addressing. But since we're coming to an end here, let us just say that there are more possibilities now than there were a few years ago. And that's good. Our job is to figure out how to embrace and make the most of those possibilities. It's like, I don't know whether that's hopeful or not. I think that given the place in which we find ourselves, it's just realistic. That's the realistic possibility of the path out. So, perhaps hope does spring eternal. I will tell you that the Red Sox triumphed in their opening day 3-0 over the Cincinnati Reds, and Roman Anthony went 3 for 4. So, all things are possible in this world. We shall see.
Thanks to Rebecca and Ollie for your provocations. Thanks again to our co-sponsors, the Salata Institute. Thanks to a really fantastic audience tonight. And Bill, thank you for your brand of liberatory optimism. It's helpful.
Good work, you guys. What a pleasure, man. That was fantastic.